let me know as soon as possible whether any of those require discussion, I would appreciate it so that we could then release staff from the call on those matters if that's not necessary. So let's go ahead and invite the CAO's office to come on up and present on item number 7 before we go to public comment.
So item number 7 is a City Administrative Officer reports relative to the COVID-19 Emergency Response Account, General City Purposes Fund Status Report for the weeks ending April 3rd, 2020 through July 31st, 2020.
Hi, this is Samantha Ju from the Office of the City Administrative Officer. Can everyone hear me okay?
We can, yes, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. So before you is a collection of weekly status reports since the creation of the COVID-19 Emergency Response Fund. Per Council's direction, we've been reporting on the weekly status of all expenditures that we've front-funded and were reimbursed at the Mayor's direction. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer anything.
I'm sorry. Mr. Kratz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. How exactly is this account funded?
Initially, it was funded through a reserve fund loan, about $20 million. And since then, we've received loans from the Building and Safety Enterprise Trust Fund, as well as very recently the Public Works Trust Fund, which is actually on today's agenda. Since then, we've repaid all loans from the Building and Safety Enterprise Trust Fund and the Reserve Fund.
And ultimately, it's expected that the federal government reimburses us for all of these funds, or no?
We actually reimburse the loans using the Coronavirus Relief Fund from the federal government. Part of the CARES Act, we use those funds to repay those payments. For other expenses where we seek typically FEMA reimbursements, those will go through the typical process we have for such federal government reimbursement.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Blumenfield.
Great, thank you. I'm assuming this is the time to ask questions on this item. I wasn't sure. Okay.
It is, that's fine. We will, after public comment, I'm going to ask that we hold it in committee until next week for further updates, but this is a perfectly appropriate time to ask questions, so go right ahead.
Okay. Basic question, there's a bunch of things on here for testing and health things, and obviously it's a health-related crisis, but shouldn't some of these be county reimbursed, since this is, health functions and come out of their CARES funding? Why is it coming out of ours instead of theirs?
That's really a direction at the mayor's office in terms of meeting the needs of the city. For additional information, I'll defer to Patty Huber, the CAO's office.
Good afternoon. This is Patty Huber from the CAO's office. The mayor's office directed for the implementation of a testing program that has been funded by the city. The county is also doing a testing program separate from ours, although they are done in coordination, but each entity is funding its own program. For the testing costs that the city has incurred, we have submitted and have been received a notice of obligation from FEMA that they will reimburse us for the 75% of our testing costs. And we are working to put together the package of documentation, invoices, timesheets, etc., that will allow us to draw down for those costs under the expedited funding program. which provided us up to 50% of our 75%. So you could argue that county health should have paid for all of this. However, there was the direction as part of our emergency response that we would do our own testing program. And so we have funded it.
So we get 75% from FEMA, and the thought is 25% come from the CARES for the health-related expenses?
Correct. And if you, for the testing costs that were incurred last fiscal year, where the city has already transferred a portion of funds back to the reserve fund to pay down the loans that we had, and then we paid down the building and safety fund from the reserve fund. Some of those costs were in fact the 25% cost share for testing is part of what we presumed in that transfer, along with the 25% of other costs that we incurred during last fiscal year, as well as direct costs that are not FEMA eligible.
What do you mean that are not? What costs are you talking about that are not FEMA eligible?
Direct salary costs for city employees are not FEMA reimbursable.
Unless they're overtime, right?
Only overtime and then expense costs. So the expense costs for the test kits, which is the bulk of what we have expended funds on, are FEMA reimbursable, yes.
And the things like the shelters and the rec and park facilities, Project Room Key.
For the Project Room Key, those are FEMA eligible. We submitted an application for the shelters in the recreation and parks facilities, and that project was denied, and we are working to have it revisited, but as of today, it is still denied. So those costs are not going to be FEMA reimbursed unless they change their decision for the shelters in the rec and park facilities.
Well, that's a big expense too, right?
It has been a decent expense. I don't remember the amount off the top of my head. I am sorry.
Okay. And the PPE and all of that, same kind of deal with the PPE and all the health-related stuff, where we...
Those are all things that we will submit to FEMA for reimbursement.
All right.
And then again, we would expect a 75%.
Okay. And then the last question I'll ask you is about the consulting services. There was $840,000 for consulting.
That was consulting services from the mayor's office to support the development of reopening of the economy in terms of reopening businesses and so on. They would need to speak to the details of what that study entailed, because I don't believe that I have seen the actual study, but they paid a consultant to help develop plans for actually reopening all of private industry and so on.
Okay, yeah, just maybe now's not the time for it. I would love to actually get more details about what that study was and what they said, how it's different than what EMD and EWDD. I just don't understand where all the pieces go and how that fits together. But maybe that's not.
I can convey to the mayor's office that you're interested in seeing the study that was completed. Yeah.
Okay, that'd be great. That'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bloomfield. Any other questions, members? And this is going to be an ongoing, regular item on our agenda, so we'll be getting regular updates. So for now, we're going to hold item 7 on the desk, and we'll go next to public comment. How many speakers do we have on the queue at the moment?
24.
24. Okay, so we're going to go for 45 minutes for public comment, and we'll get in as many speakers as we can. Speakers will have up to 2 minutes on agenda item related comments and 1 minute for general public comment. So let's go ahead and begin with the first speaker. And if you could let us know what items you wish to speak on and whether you'd like to offer general public comment, which is relating to matters not on our agenda today.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Mr. Chair, if I may read the call-in information before we begin?
Yes, please. Let's go ahead and do that.
Thank you. Members of the public who would like to offer public comment on the items listed on today's agenda should call 1-669-254-5252 and use meeting ID number 160-655-3266 and then press pound. Press pound again when prompted for participant ID. Once admitted into the meeting, press star 9 to request to speak. Thank you.
And it's very important to turn down the volume on your device so that we don't get the feedback that makes it impossible for us to hear or to be heard. So let's go ahead and call the first speaker again, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on. Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
All right, let's go ahead and call the next speaker, please. Speaker, are you there? All right, next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
My name is Maureen Levinson. I'd like to comment on item 2.
All right, go right ahead.
It is said that litigation can bring health back into a sick system. It is sick how the city protects this criminal developer as well as bad actors in the Department of Building and Safety, all at the expense of innocent victims. The truth is Mohammed Hadid's Bel Air property has been deemed dangerous not only by the civil court, but also by the California Supreme Court. More shocking is instead of paying the neighbors' litigation, since the neighbors are doing the city's job here, we are appalled to learn that the city attorney filed an anti-SLAPP case against the neighbors seeking attorney's fees from those victims. This is unfair and simply wrong. Officials take bribes, jeopardize the life of constituents, and then seek to intimidate those constituents for speaking up. Many of us here are watching how the city conducts itself with this case. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Hello, my name is Edward Flores. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go right ahead.
Wonderful. Yes, I am an Olvera Street merchant, and my family are founding members of Olvera Street since 1934. And we're serious, and I'm speaking on item number 3, the Cedillo O'Farrell. Currently, we are unfortunately without a councilman, and it's very unfortunate, the circumstance regarding that. Olvera Street represents everything that COVID restricts: fiestas, concerts, events, large gatherings, tourism, and casual shopping. People are actually, in our circumstances, heeding what's being requested of them to stay away from Olvera Street. We seriously need your help in getting some rent forgiveness because tourism is terribly down. There's nobody there. Unfortunately, the place seems to have become overrun with homelessness, and we have very few visitors. I'm down 90%, and I own one of the cafes there. And so we really need your support in supporting this motion and getting us some rent forgiveness and ultimately some other form of rent collection. We're hoping that down the line we can renegotiate our leases and at least on a temporary basis and perhaps pay on a percentage. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Hi, my name is Rosie Arroyo. I'm Senior Program Officer for Migration at the California Community Foundation. I would like to speak on item number 10. And so on behalf of the thank you. On behalf of the foundation and as co-investors of the LA Justice Fund, we want to express our gratitude to the City of Los Angeles for your leadership and commitment to immigrant families. These have been unprecedented times where our most vulnerable children and families are facing significant challenges, yet there is no doubt in our minds that the LA Justice Fund has helped to create a critical removal safety net that is having tremendous impact. Since its establishment, the program has exceeded its goals for the pilot years and has strengthened and expanded our legal infrastructure for the city and county of Los Angeles. For this and many other important reasons, our foundation, along with the Weingart Foundation, have renewed our support for the program by making an additional $1 million investment to continue to protect the legal infrastructure. And we are also encouraged by the county's continued support for the program and recommend that the City of Los Angeles consider aligning with the county's proposed recommendations to work with partners to develop a LA Justice Fund Phase 2 program model. Thank you, and we look forward to continuing to work with the city and all the partners to support this critical resource for the community.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on. Please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on.
Go ahead, speaker. Speaker, you're up. Go right ahead.
Do you listen to me?
Yes.
Okay, good afternoon. I am Norma Garcia, Ions de Casa California for 56 years on Olvera Street. I want to plead you to approve the motion of Mr. Cedillo that can give a relief to the merchants and a protection for keeping the jobs of our employees. Remember that Olvera Street always was the bastion of the history of Los Angeles. You can be the ones to keep this alive for future generations. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on. Are you speaking with me?
Yes, go right ahead.
Oh, okay. My name is Judith Bedrosian, and I would like to speak on item 2. On numerous occasions, we in the Horsex have attended hearings in the criminal court in Van Nuys regarding the Hadid matter. On one occasion, Judge Harmon only heard the defense attorneys and adjourned the hearing, not allowing our attorneys to speak. Mrs. Horsex stood up and said, "Just a moment, not, Your Honor, we are the victims," and Judge Hammond returned to the bench. There are many closed-door sessions with the new judge, the Honorable Nitu Badhan Smith. She was seemingly hostile to the plaintiff's counsel and would not hear them or let them speak. After Tina Hess left and Michelle McGinnis assumed the role of Deputy City Attorney, we had a short meeting with her outside the courtroom, and we were elated that she seemed to understand what we were fighting for. We told her that we would like these hearings to be held in open court. She did. She left us and joined the defense attorneys and went into the judge's chambers with them, and we never had an opportunity to speak with her again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
For letting me speak.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for being with us. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Hi, my name is Beatrice Horsex. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay. I want to speak on item number 2. My husband, Joe, and I live immediately below 901 Strada Vecchia. For 9 years, we have lived with city actions allowing Mr. Hadid to violate dozens of city orders and build a house that all of the experts say could easily slide down the hill onto us. It has dominated every day of our lives. It has scarred the entire Bel Air community. George Carlin said, quote, If this unsafe house falls down, it could take a portion of the neighborhood. 3 years ago, a criminal court judge sentenced Mr. Hadid to demolish the house. Yet, despite the mountains of evidence of fraud and unsafe conditions, the city attorney simply let the Hadid's probation expire without complying. It was a shocking failure by the city to protect the citizens. For 9 years, looking up at this unsafe mass of steel, concrete, and glass has caused us to live in physical fear and emotional turmoil. I do not feel safe in my own home. Please put yourself in my shoes. How would you feel living beneath that unsafe structure on a steep hillside over your head? Because of the city's misconduct, our community's faith in the city's leadership is at the very low level right now. I am here to demand accountability and ask of you to approve a small measure of justice for us. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, can you?
Please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on.
Go right ahead, sir.
Hi, this is Dan Love. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly. If you're listening to us on a device, if you could turn the volume down on the device so there isn't a delay, that would be great. And you can go right ahead when you're ready.
All right, this is very good. It's Dan Love. I'm with the Bel Air Association. I'm the president of the Bel Air Association. And, you know, we have been with this issue with the Hadid House, as Bibi said, for almost 9 years now. And I'm here really today to just talk about accountability and to stay focused on what we need to accomplish. The Board of Building and Safety Commissioners long ago ordered Hadid to tear down this house. And yet the city has yet to enforce the order. The neighbors want the order enforced. I mean, look at what the neighbors have been able to accomplish on their own without any help from the city. But the neighborhood and the residents want this construction to be determined to be a nuisance, and we need to have it demolished. It's hurting the neighborhood. It's hurting property values for neighbors that, you know, that are coming and going, all right? And so I implore you to please enforce the order, have this structure torn down. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on.
My name is, I'm calling with respect to item number 2. My name is Joe Horacek, and I live immediately below 901 Strada Vecchia, where Mr. Hadid built an illegal structure that was twice the size and height in his permits. Though some of Hadid's and the city's illegalities were concealed until we took discovery, some were known all the way back to 2012, and for years I've tried to get the city to act. In 2015, the BBSC ordered all unpermitted work to be demolished immediately. Yet 5 years later, a massive structure remains. The city has failed to hold Hadid accountable despite city officials having taken bribes and being complicit. The city attorney even let Hadid off the hook for demolishing 901 at his expense as required in his criminal sentencing. Overall, the city has done more to obstruct the demolition, even though while some in the city have admitted that the city should have been working to advance it. Judge Carlin, the judge in the civil case, visited the site and was shocked. He ruled that there is no doubt it represents a dangerous public nuisance. And in the course of over a dozen hearings, Judge Carlin has repeatedly criticized the city for its failings. The structure poses a real risk of catastrophic injury or loss of life if there's an earthquake or major rainstorm. Mr. Hadid has taken extraordinary actions to prevent demolition of 901, including the failure to pay millions of dollars of property taxes, which have prior liens, making it nearly impossible for the court-appointed receiver to obtain financing for demolition. The city should be requiring the convicted criminal to pay for demolition of the illegal structure, and the city should at least be partially compensating the Bedrosians and us who have to live in constant threat of the danger lurking above us. We have made a settlement demand to the city asking for a small amount of the millions of dollars we've had to spend to protect ourselves and the community. We ask you to approve our settlement demand. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on.
Yes, this is Gary Linsenberg for item 2. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go right ahead.
Thank you. My firm represents the victim neighbors in the city in the lawsuit against the city in connection with the city's role in developer Mohammed Hadid's illegal construction of this dangerous mansion on a very steep hillside located at 901 Strada Vecchia. We sent a settlement demand to Mr. Feuer dated December 19th, 2019, and have yet to receive any acknowledgement or response. The matter now comes before the City Council as federal prosecutors and the press expose a massive corruption scandal of how building gets approved in Los Angeles. Yet long before the recent headlines, my clients, the Bedrosians and the Horaceks, who are the neighbors living below this massive illegal structure, have been crying out for someone to pay attention to the corruption at the level of LADBS. And they've had to dive deep into their own pockets to get someone in the city to help protect them from the blatantly dangerous illegal construction. Between 2011 and 2014, the city was complicit in Hadid's campaign to build one of the city's largest ever illegal residences, perching perilously over this hillside above their homes. First, city inspectors accepted bribes, and Deputy City Inspector Anderson confessed to this. For favorable inspections, Mr. Anderson got his home rehabbed by the developer, Hadid, in exchange for never even requesting a plan check. This should have been a surprise to no one, as retired Inspector John Kelly stated in an affidavit, quote, "When I viewed the project site, my immediate thought was that someone at LADBS must have been bribed. There was no other explanation for how this project reached this state." Second, city inspectors abdicated their responsibilities, which senior members of LADBS have admitted. For years, the city allowed this dangerous mansion to reach its mammoth size without necessary.
Yeah, I'm afraid your time's expired. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on.
Hello, my name is Victor Flores, and I'm calling in regards to item number 3.
Go right ahead, sir.
So I'm calling today for, thank you, City Council, for taking your time and listening to this. Calling in regards to this, I'm a third generation of RC merchant, and I'm calling to ask you to please support this motion, as we've been there for, a lot of families have been there more than 90 years, and we want to continue with the legacy. As you know, with COVID, we don't have no tourism going into Water Street, so Water Street has been visited mainly by homeless people and damaging the street. Water Street is a landmark for everybody to come and visit. We have we have several museums, and without your support, none of this will, without the support, maybe these landmarks will be phased away. So I appreciate if you could help us with the support.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Yes, good afternoon. I'd like to speak on item 3 on public comments, please.
Very good. Go right ahead, please.
Okay, my name is Valerie Hamler. I'm also a third-generation merchant. My father actually started on Alvera Street in 1930 as a shoe shine boy. For us, Alvera Street is our home. Our families are the living history that we have here in Los Angeles. Alvera Street has all of our wonderful museums. We rely heavily on our major events in the tourism, which is right now non-existent. we're a family-oriented place where people can come and shop, but unfortunately right now it's a very slow time because of COVID. We ask your support for Mr. Cedillo's motion that will help us in this very slow recovery period, which will take a long time for us. We also ask you to please look at helping us with the gap that's left from April to June. Right now we have nothing to cover those 3 months. And then we would ask you to work with us, the merchants, to help us with some kind of modified rent structure, say a percentage of our rents, until we can get back to some normalcy, which would be like the 2019 levels. Our sales right now are down from 90 to 97%. The merchants that are opening are struggling just to make ends meet to put food and gas for their family, to stay open for the few visitors that we do have. So we ask that you please help us with this. I do have one comment for the moderator, that when the person that is about to speak, can you please let the public know beforehand that you will hear, you are muted or unmuted before they're able to speak, because I see a lot of people not speaking because we all hear you say, please state your name and the item. And the only person that's actually able to speak is the one that hears you are unmuted. So that's just a general comment to make. Maybe that'll help in the future. So we really appreciate your support in Mr. Cedillo's motion and helping Alvera Street maintain its history and the families that have been there for all these years. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Yes, it's Eric Previn. I'll give a comment on several items and a general public comment. So I am really astonished at the incredibly articulate community group pointing out how the city attorney has once again failed to protect its constituents at item number 2. And it's true. We've heard this cry from that neighborhood for many, many years. And the LADBS corruption, you know, when I think of the LADBS corruption, I think of the day that comes up every year where you essentially as a city council begin to quietly hump the LADBS guy who's retiring. I remember when it was Ray Chan, and then I remember the most recent one, which everyone was surprised by. So the problem is in City Hall, there's a comprehensive failure to do business fair and square and to support the actual community. It's what led to the CEQA panel of attorneys that Mike Pure launched successfully to ingratiate himself with developers and have them pay the, if you can believe it, legal fees of the city in its defense, which is to do wrong, essentially, where people are fighting for their lives, like in Studio City against Weintraub, which in that hornet's nest. And I would just like to say about the FEMA overtime gag, I'm so disgusted that the city has gone into the health business on overtime only. It's not what we want as a public. We know that the county handles public health. We appreciate the effort to get people tested, sort of. It became a loop of confusion, delay, and frankly, Sean Penn out there, along with a bunch of LAFD, because if you're going to get overtime, you may as well get a lot of overtime, goes the logic. And not good. And here we go again with more closed session meeting. I just want to say that the public really would benefit for agencies to do their legal business out in the open. I mean, we've heard about Judge Carter, not unhinged, he's certainly hinged, but he likes to bellow on, but then he does so only in his own quarters. Why can't the public be a part of these important policy meetings? And why shouldn't decisions about the Bedrosians be done out in the open, where we can all hear exactly what we want to hear, which is absolutely not. The city attorney can't be seeking, an action against the people who defended themselves. Ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous, and it's endless, and it continues and continues. And so I just want to thank Carol Tarosian for accepting donations from all of the people for CD7 when he was really working on their behalf in CD2, making it seem as if, was he even really leaving? You know, was it just a big stage play like the John Lee CD12 shift that recently took place, where, Staffer B or whatever is basically getting away with a fake election that we all basically had to endure, while Greg Smith, a lobbyist for waste management, effectively sat there
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Hi, my name is Camilo. I will speak on a few items. Can you hear me?
Yes, go right ahead, sir.
Awesome. So in regards to item number 1, I find it very troubling that the testimony from Charlie Beckon's police commission was disregarded in court, and the jury was not allowed to hear the findings that the use of firing the taser 5 times into this man was there was no evidence to substantiate that he was violent prior to the activation of the taser, and no evidence he was an immediate threat to the officers. So I find it very concerning that the council meets in closed session to discuss yet more malfeasance from the LAPD. I know that the plaintiffs in this case have lost, but they are appealing, and I just find it troubling that the council doesn't do more on a budgetary basis to curb the violence of the LAPD, because it costs the city and the taxpayers a lot of money. In regards to item 3, I support all of these business owners, and I would hope that the council will support rent forgiveness, and I would like the council to be able to explain how they can support this without also extending these sections to the rest of the city. You guys have the ability to cancel rent, and you guys are showing it in this motion. You guys are showing no real momentum to help the citizens of Los Angeles at large when we have crisis looming on evictions and education, in the economy and health, public health, all coming due to your inability to act. And with regard to item 7, I'm very troubled by the fact that the mayor was able to spend $840,000 on consultants on a report that you guys yourselves have admitted to not seeing at all whatsoever. And the mayor was able to spend this money on a plan that has killed hundreds of people and has sickened thousands of people. The mayor's reopening plan has been deadly and has been a disaster for public health. So for you guys to not even know what he did with $840,000 in public consulting money instead of listening to, public health directors and common sense to listen to consultants, I find that very troubling that you guys don't know what to do with the money. So I would urge you guys in your position to hold the mayor to account instead of being a fancy rubber stamp for, corruption in the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and what item you'd like to speak on.
Gregory Berber from La Luz del Dia restaurant on Alvera Street, and I would like to speak on item 3.
Go right ahead.
I'm calling for the support of item 3. Like so many citizens of our great city, the Alvera Street merchants have fallen on hard times due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We have been preserving the history of Los Angeles and the Mexican culture for the last 90 years, and we are considered a historical, cultural, human resource. We have become the essential link to the preservation of the El Pueblo historic landmark. We are unlike any other area in the city, and the items we sell are in a very narrow merchandising niche. My family and I have tried to pivot our restaurant to a takeout and patio dining experience, only to see a 90% decline in business compared to the same period last year. Our family have been a part of the street since the 1930s, and we can easily say we have never seen such an unprecedented financial impact such as this. All tourist-related travel and school tours have been canceled, museums closed. These businesses are facing catastrophic strains on operations, and we hope that you support this motion and see it go through. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Go right ahead.
Okay. Yeah, my name is George Sherman, and I would like to speak on number 3, please.
Go ahead.
I have been a merchant of Alvera Street along with my family for the last 32 years. As you very well know, just about everyone has been hit hard by this pandemic, and the merchants of Alvera Street are no exception. Some of us have been forced to close down since March 15th. Those who have been able to reopen have seen their sales drop 80 to 90%. At this rate, it won't be long before many of us, if not all, will be forced to close down for good. Therefore, myself, along with my fellow merchants, are here to ask you for your support in approving Cedillo's motion and getting us some kind of rent relief before it's too late. Please, please don't let the birthplace and oldest landmark in the city of Los Angeles disappear, along with its rich culture, history, and traditions. And thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Robert Schlesinger. I'm Planning and Land Use Committee Chairman of the Bel Air Beverly Crest Neighborhood Council. I want to support the people that have been speaking in favor of the project on 901 Strada Vecchia, but I want to add to that. Currently, Mr. Hadid is building two major projects that are going to have the same kind of detail and the size that's going on with 901 Strada Vecchia. And what I'd like to know is those two projects should be added also, because the project is just beginning at this point, all right? And maybe somebody can do something about stopping that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
This is Gary Linsenberg. I cut off. I'm asking for permission for 15 seconds to conclude my remarks.
Go ahead.
Very briefly, my clients are human victims, and they're victims not only of Hadid's misconduct, but the city's. And they're your constituents, the residents of Los Angeles. Two of these neighbors have spent millions of their own dollars to bring these illegalities to light. We're looking for an acknowledgement and accountability by the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. All right, next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Bertha Gomez, number 3.
Thank you. Go right ahead.
My family has helped preserve the historical and Mexican cultural legacy on Authorizing since 1953, 67 years ago. I am a third-generation merchant operating Rudy's Mexican Candy and Misturenas. I'm requesting your support, your compassion, but most of all, your authorization for rent forgiveness. El Pueblo, our great city's crown jewel, will not survive without our street merchants. We need your help. Without your support, I will not be able to carry out my late husband's legacy, a dream that I've always hoped to pass on to my children. For these reasons and more, I ask you again to support today's motion. Please provide us with the support we desperately need. I thank you in advance. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
My name is Alexandra Morales. Good afternoon. I'm calling for comment on item number 10 on behalf of CARECEN, the Central American Research Center. It is clear that the attacks on our immigrant communities continue to increase. Thus, in the immediacy, the need for the LA Justice Fund that can continue to take cases is very necessary and critical in ensuring that the Los Angeles immigrant families do not get torn apart by deportations without due process. And in the long term, it is clear that the LA Justice Fund is part of the local safety net that Angelino immigrant families rely on, and it will continue to play a critical role in the livelihood of our immigrant community at large. Therefore, we call for the support of the Renewal of the Los Angeles Justice Fund. The county a few weeks ago acknowledged its support for the Justice Fund, and we look to the city to continue to work with the county and community stakeholders to ensure in the immediacy and the long term that our immigrant communities can continue to rest assured that in the city of Los Angeles, immigrants will indeed be defended. So today we ask the committee to continue to support the LA Justice Fund. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Go ahead, speaker. Go right ahead. Speaker, go ahead, please. Go ahead, speaker. We can hear you. We can't hear a voice, though. Go right ahead. Okay, final call. Hello? Okay, we'll need to go to the next speaker then.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Good afternoon. My name is Tanya Sosuk, and I'd like to provide a comment on item number 10. I work at the Bel Air Institute of Justice, which works with diverse jurisdictions around the country that are dedicated to ensuring that all members of the communities have access to due process and a fair day in court, a principle that is central to America's vision of justice. Vera was tasked with the data collection for the pilot period of the Los Angeles Justice Fund, as well as engaging in the implementation and impact evaluation. What we learned from the gathering of that data is that the pilot period has shown the power of a public and private partnership to expand the safety net that's available to 1/3 of Angelinos who identify as immigrants. During the last 2 years of the fund, LA Justice Fund has not only met its goal, but exceeded them in various ways. It has bolstered existing removal defense capacity of providers in the region and shifted the culture of advocacy in the Los Angeles Immigration Court. Representation has shown that it has radiating impacts far beyond those people that are directly served by the fund. Roughly 1/2 of adult clients in LA Justice Fund have minor children in the United States, the vast majority of whom are U.S. citizens. LAJF clients have steep ties in the United States with an average of 14 years in the United States. And we've seen that the LA Justice Fund has served the most vulnerable people in LA, with almost 92% of all clients confronting additional vulnerabilities beyond their precarious situation being a risk of removal. LAJF attorneys have achieved a lot of success. They have prevailed on behalf of a lot of their clients in high numbers and demonstrated the crucial importance of representation and immigration. As the city is looking at phase 2 of the program, we encourage the city to not limit the fund to only existing cases, but instead maximize the fund by allowing grantees the flexibility to decide for themselves whether they can, after careful review of their caseload, accept cases responsibly without adversely impacting their obligations to zealously represent their clients. We also ask the city to align with the county in its commitment to work with partners to develop an implementation strategy for future funding of the LA Justice Fund. Thank you for your support of the LA Justice Fund.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Go ahead, speaker.
I already spoke.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Go right ahead, speaker. Speaker, are you there? Go right ahead. Yes, go ahead, please. Speaker, go ahead and begin speaking, please. to move on to the next speaker. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Hello? Go right ahead, speaker. Yes, go right ahead, speaker. Yes, go ahead. Last chance. All right, next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
I've already spoken, but thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
I already spoke. Thank you.
All right, is there a way that we can distinguish from those who are still in the queue from those who have already spoken?
Those who've already spoken I've been removing, so I'm not sure how they've been re-entering, but we still have 4 people in the queue.
Okay, let's go right ahead.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
My name is Vivian Bonzo, third generation merchant from Olvera Street, and we are greatly in need of your support today for Councilman Cedillo's motion. Without a councilman, we're really at a loss for how to survive on Olvera Street. We're, needing the rent forgiveness. We're needing it from April, and without that help, I'm afraid El Pueblo will come to an end. And please, council members, we are small businesses. We're reliant on tourism. We are reliant on fiestas. We have none, and we just obviously are not able to make the rent at this time. So we're relying on your compassion and your help. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Ay, qué boluda.
Hello? Yes, go ahead, speaker. Hello? Go right ahead. Okay, next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Go ahead, speaker.
I have already spoken.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Go right ahead. Go ahead, speaker. Yes, hello. Next speaker, please.
Please state your name and the item you'd like to speak on.
Sorry, I've already spoken.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman, this is the final speaker.
Okay. That
Please
was
state your name
next
and the item you'd like to speak on.
I have also already spoken.
Okay, very good. Well, thank you very much. And I think that, is that the end of our queue of speakers? Okay. Very good. Then, members, what? Mr. Kress, did you have your hand up? Yes. Mr. Kress, go right ahead.
If you're asking for items to pull, you may want to shoot me, but 4, 9, and 10.
Well, I don't believe in violence. I don't believe in violence, Mr. Kretz, but okay. So 4, 9, and 10. And all right, so first order of business, members, is item number 7. We're going to go ahead and continue until the next meeting. And we can, what I would recommend is that we approve item 5, item 8, on consent, unless there are objections to doing so. Seeing none, I guess, do we have to take a roll? I guess we do. So let's go ahead and take the roll on those consent items.
Thank you. For items 5 and 8, and to continue item 7, Councilmember Krikorian.
Aye.
Councilmember Price.
Aye.
Councilmember Koretz.
It sounded like a different name. If that was me, aye.
Thank you. Councilmember Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Councilmember Bonin.
Bonin, aye.
Those items are approved.
All right, thank you. Let's go ahead then and call item number 4, please.
Item number 4 is a motion, Blumenfield Rodriguez O'Farrell, relative to appropriating $450,000 from the fiscal year 2020-21 general city purposes, $10 million additional homeless services line item to support the homeless housing and recovery project in partnership with Tarzana Treatment Centers, Inc. and Providence for temporary housing, patient navigators, and ancillary services.
Okay. Mr. Kretz, did you want to hear a report on this, or did you want to comment?
No, I just had a really quick question. So it says the motion will have a $450,000 impact to the general fund. What's the impact? Is it just an advance to the general fund, which is reimbursed later, or is it just an allocation from the general fund that won't be reimbursed?
Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon. This is Yolanda Chavez with the CAO. Actually, the $10 million is allocated in the general city purposes line item in the approved budget, so it will not have a general fund impact as that item is allocated for homeless services.
Great. Thank you for clarifying that.
All right. Any other discussion of this item? Mr. Blumenfield, did you want to be heard on this?
Well, if there's any issues with this item, I'm happy to go into a little bit of detail about what this money is actually being used for and why it's so critical. If that's the issue, because this
didn't seem like that it was. I think Mr. Kretz just wanted to find out what the funding source was, and I think he's been satisfied.
Okay.
So I think we can go ahead and approve this item then. Okay. If there's no objection, let's go ahead and call the roll.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Koretz.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Bonin.
Bonin, aye.
5 ayes. This item is approved.
Very good. Thank you very much. That will bring us, let's go ahead and take up item number 9 next.
Item number 9 is an Office of Finance report and resolution relative to authorizing the investment of city monies in the State of California Local Agency Investment Fund.
Mr. Kretz, you have a question on that one?
Yeah, one quick question on this one also. The fund is currently yielding substantially more than...
Wait, I need to interrupt you for 1 minute, Mr. Kretz. Hi, Jacob. It seems like Mr. Bonin has been replaced on the committee.
He's going to be gone for a few minutes.
Oh, he is? Okay. Well, thank you, Jacob. All right, go ahead, Mr. Kretz.
I'll have to sidetrack for 1 second, following up on that, and mention when I was in the legislature and chaired the Labor Committee, I had a meeting where my daughter, who was 9, sat next to me during the meeting, and then I had to rush off for a moment to be in another committee and turn it over to the vice chair. and several people came into the committee hearing and thought she was chairing Labor Committee for me.
Did she vote?
No.
All right, go right ahead, Mr. Gratz.
So my question on this is, it's an obvious choice, but we at one point used this as an investment as well. Why did we stop? Because it seems like such a no-brainer. How did we have a period where we were getting so little and weren't participating in this fund?
Is there somebody who can respond to Mr. Kretz's question in the CAO's office?
Sir, I do not believe we have staff on this item. We will have to report back with that answer separately.
Yeah, I would just be curious why we ever stopped, because it seems like a very logical step, but one which we probably should have been doing all along.
Mr. Kretz, are you comfortable with moving this forward and approving it and then following up with that information at a later time?
Yeah, I'm fine. In fact, if the CAO or other staff just get back to my office. It's a great decision, so I certainly don't want to hold it up for a minute.
Terrific, thank you. So then the recommendation, members, is to approve the Office of Finance recommendation and adopt the local agency investment fund resolution. If there's no objection, we can go ahead and call the roll.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Koretz.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Bonin.
Bonin, aye.
5 ayes. This item is approved.
Great. It almost sounded like 6 ayes with Jacob. So let's go ahead and call item number 10 next, please.
Item number 10 is a CAO and Chief Legislative Analyst reports relative to an update on the status of the Los Angeles Justice Fund. At its meeting held on March 9th, 2020, the Immigrant Affairs, Civil Rights, and Equity Committee approved the recommendations in the CAO report as amended and noted and filed the CAO report.
I'm sorry about that. Members, on this item, the recommendation would be to concur in the Immigrant Affairs, Civil Rights, and Equity Committee's recommendations. Mr. Kretz, go right ahead.
There are some that have questioned how well managed the program is. So do we feel this has been well managed? And to the extent that it can be determined at this point, has it been effective? And if not, how can we improve it?
Is there anybody who's prepared to respond to Mr. Kretz's question on that?
Hi, this is Felipe Chavez with the Office of the Chief Legislative Analyst. I believe the CAO has been evaluating the status reports that have been provided by the California Community Foundation with respect to how the funds have been used. I don't know that they can respond to how effective the program has been. I know the CCF has reported that they have exceeded their goals and expectations of the program. So in that sense, it seems that it has been effective. I'm not sure if the CAO has additional comments.
Okay, well, let's go ahead and move to Mr. Bonin while we're waiting to see if there's any other comments from the CAO. Go ahead, Mr. Bonin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a couple things rather briefly, I think. I heard in one of the public comments today there was a request from one of the advocates to allow the agencies, if the funding we are providing allows, to be able to take on additional compliance or cases, and I wanted to know if that is possible and included in the direction. And the second was an ask, which I would assume is fairly simple, is that the city work with the county and philanthropic partners to develop potential strategies for future years of the program.
Yeah, and I think as for the latter point, I believe that would be encompassed in the various reports back that the policy committee had recommended. As to the former, I can't speak to what the policy committee's consideration was, but I can imagine that the concern was that yes, you can take on if you were to take on additional cases within the existing resources. Once those cases are taken on, they are a continuing obligation, and so there may very well become a need then to come back to the city for more funding for those. And so that's why I believe that's probably why the policy committee made that decision, and that certainly would be the concern that I would have in having this committee vary from the instructions provided, the recommendations provided by Immigrant Affairs.
Sure. So if staff could just get me the details or info on that prior to this going to council. That'll be all. Thanks. Great. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on this one, members? Mr. Kratz?
Oh, just wondering whether there's anybody that could actually speak to my question with knowledge, and I guess with not. If not, I would ask that they get back to me also before this comes to council.
Okay. Very good. Well, beyond what Mr. Chavez had provided, if we can get a further, deeper response to Mr. Bretz's questions between now and the time it gets to council, that would be appreciated.
Thank you.
And again, the reports back and the existing report that has already been submitted with regard to cases to date provides a lot of information. How you analyze that as to whether or not that constitutes good management is, a more subjective issue. But I think, we can certainly have a longer discussion with that between staff and your office. All right. If there's any other comments, if not, the recommendation was to concur with Immigrant Affairs on its recommendations. If there's no objections, let's go ahead and call the roll.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Koretz.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Bonin.
Bonin, aye.
5 ayes. This item will be concurring with Immigrant Affairs and Civil Rights and Equity Committee.
Paul, you're on mute.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and take up item number 3 next, please.
Item number 3 is a motion, Cedillo O'Farrell, relative to instructing the El Pueblo de Los Angeles Historical Monument Authority to waive rent payments due from merchant tenants at the El Pueblo de Los Angeles Historical Monument for the months of July 2020 through December 2020, and credit any rent paid prior to the effective date of this action toward future rent due.
All right. Do we have someone prepared to present a report on that matter?
Good afternoon, Albert Griego, Office of the CAO.
Good afternoon.
The 2021 adopted budget assumes a 3-month closure scenario for El Pueblo and provides funding to offset revenue losses for 3 months in the unappropriated balance Zoo and El Pueblo revenue shortfalls line item. The fiscal impact of the motion is estimated at $1.1 million, of which the unappropriated balance provides $550,000 for 3 months of rent loss. It is anticipated that the adoption of this motion would result in an additional budget gap of $550,000 and this office will report back with a recommendation to offset the remaining budget gap in the first financial status report.
Okay, does that conclude your report?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Members, any comments or questions? Let's start with Mr. Blumenfield, please.
First is a technical one, and maybe I'm just not reading it right. The idea of the motion makes sense. I'm 100% for it. Should it be amended to be made more clear about the rent paid prior to the effective date of the motion? Because the way it looks, you get credit for rent paid prior to the motion. It doesn't say when that starts. I would assume you're talking April 1st or something like that. Doesn't that need to be in there, or am I missing it?
I believe this motion references merchant rent from the months of July to December 2020.
Yes, but then it says, and gets credit for rent paid prior to the effective date of the motion, which in theory you could be giving credit for rent paid for the last decade. But presumably you only want to give credit for rent paid since April. I just think it needs to be spelled out. It wasn't clear to me or my staff in looking at it when the start date of when you're getting credit for paid rent is.
So, in other words, the concern would be that if a tenant were delinquent prior to the beginning of COVID-19, your concern is that that rent shortfall should not be forgiven.
No, my concern is that, I mean, yes, but also we're saying we're going to pay the rent from July or 3 months forward, but we're giving people credit if they paid rent prior to that date. But presumably there has to be a start date on that. I'm assuming prior to paying rent on April 1st or something like that, because those are dates that they haven't paid the rent.
Oh, no, that's a fair point.
And so it looks like if there's no start date of when the rent, you're getting credit for rent paid, you could theoretically be going back a decade. I don't think anyone intends that, but just want to be precise in the way it's written, unless there's... All I'm asking is that we tighten that up, and so that we're very clear on what is the start date when you're getting credit for the rent previously paid. Because it doesn't appear clear to me. So if there's a way to tighten that up, I would ask that we just be clear. Again, I'm totally supportive of what we're doing here. We need to model the behavior that we're trying to put out there, which is we're trying to encourage landlords to forgive rent and to make deals on rent and all of the rest. Here, this is our own backyard. We should be doing it. This is a purely technical question, and so I would just ask that we make it very clear if the intent is to start with rent that was getting credit for starting on April 1st, then just state that. So while you're figuring that out, the other thing I wanted to know is I wonder if the motion could be expanded to ask for a report back from PSD about options for rent forbearance from other people with leases on city property. You think about the LA Mall or Weapon Park dealing with their concessionaires. While El Pueblo is very special, and we recognize that, it would be good to get a comprehensive look at other city tenants and how we're helping or how we could help those tenants.
Good afternoon. This is Yolanda Chavez with the CAO. Just as you read the motion, I think the intent was to help tenants, to help them cover rent during the first part of this fiscal year. And so it doesn't seem like the intention was to cover any rent prior to the start of this fiscal year. So if if merchants actually paid rent at the start of this fiscal year in July, then they would get credit for that if this motion passes. That's how we read the motion, but if you'd like to amend the motion as read, we could do that. But that's how we read it, that it's for to be able to provide some, to waive rent for this fiscal year, not prior to July 1st. Unless, Albert, is that your understanding as well?
Yes, that's my understanding as well.
So when it says to have any rent prior to the effective date of the motion be credited toward future rent, what does that mean?
So it means that if you're giving them that if you're giving them credit starting at the start of this fiscal year, right? It's starting in July, and if they paid in July, then you would give them, that would be credit maybe for January, since now you're waiving rent payments from July to December of this fiscal year.
Okay, so you're saying if you've made rent payments prior to the date of this motion, but after the start of the year, after July 1st?
Exactly. That's how we read the motion.
Right.
Because the waiver for rent payments is from July to December. So since the motion is now being approved in August, or will be approved by council shortly, if anyone made rent payments at the start of this fiscal year, they would get credit for that given the approval, if this motion is approved by council and mayor.
Right. And if you made rent payments prior to that, it would not be. If you made rent payments in April and May.
Right, because this does not waive rent payments for that period of time, just from July through December of this fiscal year.
Okay. All right. If you think it's clear and the city attorney thinks it's clear, then okay. Okay. Then with that, if there's no objection, we can go ahead. Or is there any other discussion, first of all? Well, and then I was asking about whether they would consider, or what you all thought about considering expanding it a little bit to get a report back on, other tenants. Yeah, I think that's an important report back for us to get. I will look to Mr. Favell to tell us whether we can do that within the context of this agenda item, or whether we need to bring it separately, or if we can just do that informally right now. But I do very much think that for other tenants that are similarly situated, for which we are the landlord, we really ought to have that information ahead of us, in front of us. So if it's appropriate to add on to this amendment, then I'd like to do that. If it's not, then we can figure out another way to do it. But the city attorney has an opinion on that. And while we're waiting for that opinion, if I could go to Mr. Kretz.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, while we are the landlord to a number of businesses, I think this one was selected both for its historic importance and the fact that even in normal times, the merchants on Olvera Street are among the most marginal businesses that don't have a lot of profit involved. And most certainly if we weren't giving them a break on their rents, they would probably all be out of business in short order, which we don't want to see. The rest of the tenants of the city are not all situated similarly. So while we might want to expand it, I think these are the most obvious and most deserving, certainly.
Yeah, and I think we can certainly act separately on this because they are very uniquely situated, and especially this is the birthplace of Los Angeles and so forth. But at the same time, I'm going to make the command decision and also include in our report, the committee's report, which advances this to council, the request that the CAO report to this committee with any other commercial leases in which the city is the landlord, so that we have at least have a sense of what sort of scale of issues we're talking about. Okay. All right. If there are no objections or further comments, let's go ahead and call the roll.
Krikorian.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Koretz.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Bonin.
Bonin.
5 ayes, this item is approved.
Thank you. And that brings us to item number 6.
Item number 6 is the Board of Public Works report relative to transfer of funds from the Public Works Trust Fund loan for COVID-19 emergency response. At its meeting held on August 5th, 2020, the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee approved the recommendations in the Board of Public Works report as amended.
Very good. Thank you. Mr. Campos?
Good afternoon. Fernando Campos, Executive Officer with the Board of Public Works. Hope everyone is well. The item before your committee today is an approval to transfer and approve a loan from the Public Works Trust Fund in the amount of $75 million to the General City Purposes Fund. This loan is to provide ongoing necessity of emergency response to the COVID-19 pandemic, more specifically purchasing supplies for public use. In accordance to the mayor's declaration of the emergency back on March 4th, 2020 of the coronavirus pandemic, the City of Los Angeles took action to advance $20 million from the emergency reserve funds to the city's general city purposes. In addition to that, your council has approved loans from the Department of Building and Safety's Enterprise Fund for about $125 million. There was an item before your committee today that indicated that that loan has been repaid, and we are looking for an approval for $75 million to transfer the $75 million from the Public Works Trust Fund, again, to the city's general fund purpose. Just to give you a quick background on the Public Works Trust Fund, the money that we have in the Public Works Trust Fund is monies that we receive from depositors or developers for a specific development or capital improvement project that's related to public works infrastructure. As of the date of the report, the Public Works Trust Fund had a balance of $142.9 million. Of that $142.9 million, we have lent out 27.5%, or about $39 million in outstanding loans from the fund. Currently, our practice is having a balance to loan ratio of no more than 30%, anywhere from 25 to no more than 30%. The loan before you would actually exceed that threshold up by 52% to a new balance to loan ratio of 80%, or a total outstanding balance of $114 million. There was one recommendation made to our Board of Public Works, and that is to proceed with caution simply because our working capital typically requires anywhere from $20 to $25 million in any given year to meet our obligations. Our working capital reserve is set at 25%. This loan would actually decrease that 25% working capital ratio down to about 22%, leaving us to about $28 million in the account. We believe that the $28 million in working capital is sufficient to get us through the next year. However, we did sound the yellow alarms, if you will, to our board just to proceed with caution and to work specifically with our mayor's office and also with our CAO's office on the repayment schedule of this loan if it were to be approved. We are recommending that we work with the CAO, the mayor's office, to get that reimbursement back as quickly as possible. The loan before you is estimating a repayment term of about 18 months. However, we believe that we will start receiving repayments towards the $75 million loan as early as 6 months from now, simply because it takes a couple of months for the department and also the city to spend the money, and then a couple of months for that documentation to be submitted and compiled by the CAO's office, and then submitted to the federal government for reimbursement through the CARES Act. In addition to that, and my last point is that the loan that is being recommended for approval, we have recommended to the mayor's office to use that $75 million to go towards the 75% of the allowable reimbursable portion from the CARES Act. Absent of that, then the city would have to come up with that additional 25%, or the matching cost, if you will, of the CARES Act reimbursement compliance parameters. Therefore, we are recommending that the city use this $75 million for the reimbursable portion. The item was also considered by the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee last week, and the committee approved the item as amended, and they requested a report back from our office on the types of expenditures that will be related to the $75 million. Our office does not track what this loan would pay. However, we will work very closely with the mayor's office and CAOs in terms of what would be paid for in terms of supplies and services that this $75 million will provide. Last thing I forgot to mention is that we are recommending that we do not assess any interest on this loan, simply because the interest earned from the Public Works Trust Fund is transferred to the general city fund every year. Transferring this money to the city's general city purpose, that money is already being earned. That money is earning interest, and that interest is going back to the general fund. Therefore, at the end of the day, it's going back to the general fund. Therefore, we're asking that the waiver of interest be assessed for this loan. With that, I'll open it up for any questions that you may have, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Campos, and I'm glad that you sounded the yellow alarm. Seems like we're sounding the yellow alarm all over the place now, and yellow is better than red, so that's good. Any comments or questions for Mr. Campos, members? So the recommendation is to concur in the Board of Public Works recommendation of July 17th, 2020. And if there is no discussion or if there are no questions, we can go ahead and call the roll.
Thank you. And just for clarification, would the committee like to concur with the Public Works and Gang Reduction Committee action of August 5?
Well, I guess in order to avoid offense to the chair, we certainly should do that. So let's go ahead and concur in the committee's actions as well.
Thank you. I was on the edge of my seat.
Thank you. Krikorian.
Aye.
Price.
Aye.
Koretz.
Aye.
Blumenfield.
Blumenfield, aye.
Bonin.
Bonin, aye.
5 ayes.
Very good. Thank you all. So does that conclude our open session agenda? Well, hearing nothing otherwise, I guess this will now take us into, we'll go ahead now and go into closed session to consider items 1 and 2. So, Ms. Morales, can you lead us into closed session?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We will be setting up for closed session. Just 1 minute.
Okay.
Thank you. We are ready to go back into open session.
All right. Thank you very much. The Budget and Finance Committee now is back in open session. We have completed our open session items, and after having considered the two items in closed session, I believe there's no other business before the committee. And so we are adjourned. Thank you very much. Have a great day and stay safe, everyone.
Sure.